I'd like to take a moment now to talk you through some Industrial Revolution sources. There's a huge amount of sources out there, a fascinating era, as I've said before. So let's have a look firstly at this image. We see quite a lot of nostalgic artwork during this time, particularly coming out of Britain, and I thought this was a good example. In this one, we see the contrast between the new mills, the new industrial landscape on fire, often seen as a hellish landscape, and the traditional country homesteads. It's very much often seen as a scene of hellish, evil cities and idyllic countryside. And so get used to seeing a lot of paintings made at this time that make the countryside look incredibly romantic, but the cities as frightening, dark and scary places. Across Europe, we see a nostalgia for the beautiful countryside. Cities are often associated with evil, with darkness, with crime and violence, whereas the countryside becomes idealised. Here's a couple of illustrations of Manchester at the top and London below. Street scenes, looking the overcrowding of the cities, looking at the cramped living conditions, people gathering around doorways, lots of children in the street, the inability to keep pace with the dirt. We've got horses and carriages riding amongst people. We've got children playing in the muck. We've got dogs. These areas are busy, they're bustling, but they're overcrowded, they're dark, they're gloomy. And you can even pick up in some elements of it the disparity, the gap in wealth between the rich and the poor. You can see these people here who look quite wealthy compared to the poor children working in the streets, those sweeping the streets and so on. This is an image of an early commuter train. You can see the steam engine at the start. You can see the passengers arranged in their carriages going through the countryside. It is the very first time we would see steam trains, and with steam trains we start to see the beginnings of pollution and so on. This is a photograph inside an American textile mill showing women workers, and it gives you a sense of what it must be like in these areas. And these couple of images also from the American Industrial Revolution in that later period, photographs of child labourers in factories. The issue of child labour during the Industrial Revolution is quite a significant one, and we start to see various laws coming in, certain inquiries being done in the 1840s in Britain to deal with it. And let's have a look at some of that now. The coal mining industry was an area in which children were particularly exploited in Britain. And so we're seeing the Hetton Colliery near Sunderland in England, up in the north west of England. You can see the various steam engines that has own private steam railways. You can see the rocks and broken dirt, and you can see the coal piles being established around. But very significantly is that the colliery is churning out pollution. Many of our climate scientists are dating climate change, global warming, as starting from this period. This is atmospheric climate change beginning during the Industrial Revolution. This image is quite interesting because it shows both women and children at work in a coal mining context. We have a woman in rags and we have children being lowered down a coal mine. There are quite a lot of records of children being mistreated in coal mines and in factories from a parliamentary inquiry in 1842 in Britain. So again, giving you an idea of what it must be like in the Industrial Revolution from sources. From that same child labour report of 1842, we get this image, and it shows a trapper, a small child whose job it is to open airlock doors for carriages filled with coal, being pushed by children, by the way, through a coal mine underground, being pushed along by children. And some of the descriptions are quite useful. They're in a dark pit the entire time, frequently for over 12 hours a day. They're sitting still, cramped down, in a hole in the dark. Part of the reason children were used for this purpose is that they were small and therefore less time needed to be spent digging big tunnels for adult workers. Small, cramped tunnels that only children could get into. This is an amazing cartoon, and one of the things I want you to take a look at is what we've got here, and there's a few marked in already, a few elements marked in that we'll build on straight away. Firstly, we see the image divided into two. There's a curtain. There's a hidden scene between the sale of products on one side to women and the production of products by men and by women on the other side. So here we see the shops being run by men selling fabric. Again, we can see piles of fabric on this side. I've shaded them pink for you. We see fabric being produced in factories on one side of the curtain for women on the other. Conversations are being had on both sides. On the side where the sales are being made is referred to as the cheap house. But on the other side, we can see, whoops, hello, going the wrong way for you. We can see the production process and other conversations being held. Let's have a look at it. We see women workers going into the factory where they climb a set of stairs and go into what is essentially a meat grinder. And women are churned through a machine. Their labour, the labour of women, results in them being broken and crushed to produce fabric. Who's doing this? Evil-looking men in factories. Evil-looking men making a profit. And we can see that coming through down here, where the profits come marching out and being sent off to the bank. Look at the conversations. On one side, we have women purchasing fabric, saying, I cannot imagine how they can possibly be made for the price, that the fabrics are cheap. And the women are saying, I can't understand how that could be so. On this side, the female workers, often the same people, the market and the creators are the same. On this other side, it says, I understand that it's impossible to get a living at this work. Another woman replies, so I have heard, but nevertheless, we must try. So women can't make a living in producing textiles, but they have no options. They must try. They're exploited. They're put into a factory system that's being likened to a meat grinder so that business people can make a profit. On this side, they're making a profit out of selling the same fabrics that are made by the same women to women as customers. Women are being exploited on both sides of the equation for profit. So all of these shaded bits are key components of this Crookshank cartoon of what it must be like to live and work as a woman during the Industrial Revolution. Let's now have a look at it without any shading at all. Here is our cartoon as you would have seen it initially. Very important, the dividing curtain down the middle. We have to identify the textiles. We have to identify the textiles being sold. We have to identify that it's a cheap house and that there are women on both sides of the equation here, and that perhaps symbolically they are essentially the same, that the customers are the producers of the items. Those who are exploited in the making of items are the same ones exploited when they buy the items. The women feel like they're getting a deal on one side by saying the prices are so low. I can't understand how the items can be made for the price. But over here on the other side, we get an understanding of why that is. To maximize profits, business people crush the workers, the female workers in this case, to make a product and to make a profit. And so here we have women saying, we have no options. We cannot understand how we might even hope to make a decent living out of this job. But nonetheless, they must try. It's a really interesting cartoon, this. Take a moment to play around with it and think about it. I've this time shown you some elements of shading beforehand. Hopefully watching that shading beforehand and then removing the shading might give you a different way of seeing where elements have been picked up on. And you might see other things as well.